Chapter 1 We Meet Seth. The circumstances leading up to the Seth sessions still surprise me. I wasn't drifting, looking for a sense of purpose, for example. My first novel had just been published in paperback, and all my energies were channeled into becoming a good novelist and poet. I considered nonfiction the field of journalists, not creative writers. I thought my life and work were planned, my course set. Yet here I am, writing my third book of nonfiction. The year 1963 had been a poor one for us, though. Rob had severe back trouble and hardly felt well enough to paint when he came home from work. I was having difficulties settling on another book idea. Our old pet dog, Misha, had died. Perhaps these circumstances made me more aware than usual of our human vulnerability, but certainly many people have had difficult years with no resulting emergence of psychic phenomena. Perhaps, all unknowing, I had reached a crisis, and my psychic abilities awoke as the result of inner need. Certainly, such matters were far from my mind. To my knowledge, I'd never had a psychic experience in my life, and I didn't know anyone who had. Nothing in my background prepared me for the astonishing event of September 9th, 1963, yet it was this event, I'm sure, that initiated the sessions and my introduction to Seth. It was a lovely autumn evening. After supper, I sat down at my old table in the living room, as I always did, to work on my poetry. Rob was painting in the back studio, 3 rooms away. I took out my pen and paper and settled down with my 9th and 10th cup of coffee for the day and my cigarettes. Willie, our cat, dozed on the blue rug. What happened next was like a trip without drugs. If someone had slipped me an LSD cube on the sly, the experience couldn't have been more bizarre. Between 1 minute and the next, a fantastic avalanche of radical new ideas burst into my head with tremendous force, as if my skull were some sort of receiving station, turned up to unbearable volume. Not only ideas came through this channel, but sensations, intensified and pulsating. I was tuned in, turned on, whatever you want to call it, connected to some incredible source of energy. I didn't even have time to call out to Rob. It was as if the physical world were really tissue paper thin, hiding infinite dimensions of reality, and I was suddenly flung through the tissue paper with a huge ripping sound. My body sat at the table, my hands furiously scribbling down the words and ideas that flashed through my head. Yet I seemed to be somewhere else at the same time, traveling through things. I went plummeting through a leaf to find a whole universe open up, and then out again, drawn into new perspectives. I felt as if knowledge was being implanted in the very cells of my body so that I couldn't forget it. A gut knowing, a biological spirituality. It was feeling and knowing, rather than intellectual knowledge. At the same time, I remembered having a dream the night before, which I had forgotten, in which the same sort of experience had occurred, and I knew the two were connected. When I came to, I found myself scrawling what was obviously meant as the title of that odd batch of notes. The physical universe as idea construction. Later, the Seth material would develop those ideas, but I didn't know that at the time. In one of the early sessions, Seth said that this had been his first attempt to contact me. I only know that if I'd begun speaking for Seth that night, I would have been terrified. As it was, I didn't know what had happened, yet even then, I felt that my life had suddenly changed. The word revelation came to mind, and I tried to dismiss it, yet the word was apt. I was simply afraid of the term, with its mystical implications. I was familiar with inspiration in my own work, but this was as different from ordinary inspiration as a bird is from a worm. The ideas that I quote-unquote received were just as startling. they turned all my ideas of reality upside down. That morning, and each morning until that time, I'd been sure of one thing. You could trust physical reality. You might not like it at times, but you could depend on it. You could change your ideas toward it if you chose, but this would in no way change what reality was. Now, I could never feel that way again. During that experience, I knew that we formed physical reality, not the other way around. That our senses showed us only one three-dimensional reality out of an infinite number that we couldn't ordinarily perceive. That we could trust our senses only so far and only so long as we did not ask questions that were beyond their limited scope of knowledge. But more, I just didn't know, for example, that everything had its own consciousness. Now I suddenly felt the fantastic vitality present even in the things I'd previously considered inanimate. A nail was sticking in the windowsill, and I experienced ever so briefly the consciousness of the atoms and molecules that composed it. Despite all my previous ideas and common sense, I knew that time wasn't a series of moments, one before the other, each one like a clothespin stuck on a line, but that all experience existed in some kind of eternal now. All of this was scribbled down so fast, and I still have the manuscript. Even now it fills me with that sense of discovery and revelation. Here are a few quotes from that manuscript. We are individualized portions of energy, materialized within physical existence, to learn to form ideas from energy and make them physical. This is idea construction. We project ideas into an object so that we can deal with it. But the object is the thought, materialized. This physical representation of idea permits us to learn the difference between the I who thinks and the thought. Idea construction teaches the I what it is by showing it its own products in a physical manner. We learn by viewing our own creations, in other words. We learn the power and effect of ideas by changing them into physical realities. And we learn responsibility in the use of creative energy. The entity is the basic self, immortal, non-physical. It communicates on an energy level with other entities and has an almost inexhaustible supply of energy at its command. The individual is the portion of the whole self that we manage to express physically. The I projects and focuses the inner image, idea, onto the physical world in the same manner that a motion picture camera transfers an image onto a screen. The mouth creates words. The ears create sound. The difficulty in understanding this principle is due to the fact that we've taken it for granted that the image and sound already exist for the senses to interpret. Actually, the senses are the channels of creation by which idea is projected into material expression. The basic idea is that the senses developed not to permit awareness of an already existing material world, but to create it. Those ideas were only a touchstone for what would come later. The manuscript finally consisted of about 100 pages, including new definitions of old terms. For example, the subconscious is the threshold of ideas' emergence into the individual conscious mind. It connects the entity and the individual. The physical body is the material construction of the entity's idea of itself under the properties of matter. Instinct is the minimum ability for idea construction necessary for physical survival. The present is the apparent point of any idea's emergence into physical matter. I think that this experience and the manuscript were extensions of the creative subconscious processes that are behind each creative act. Normal creativity suddenly quote-unquote turned on